everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this great weekday, Monday. We're talking about the Boston Tea Party, and we just finished with the Boston Massacre. Now we're talking about the Boston Tea Party, and we're going to go all the way into Lexington and Concord. There is so much to talk about, so we're not even going to give you all the regular spiel that we give you in the beginning, because we need to get into this. This is very exciting. This is very good information that you need to know. And we're going to share it with you today. Okay, so what happened in Boston? So because of all these things happening in Boston, the Boston Massacre, you had John Adams defending the British soldiers. So people were not very happy with him. Do you know who actually went against him in court? Who was on the opposite side? So you had John Adams and you had Samuel Adams on the other side. Wow. So you had brothers going against each other. Brothers or cousins? Brothers, yeah, going against each other because this was such a hot topic. And John Adams, the only reason why he was defending the British is because he believed that they had the right to be tried in front of a judge, not in front of a mob, and to have good representation. Again, unlike the British with representation, they didn't think the colonists should have them, but John Adams did. And actually, he was hoping that he could help the British to see the reasoning behind all these things. So let's keep going into this, what's happening in Boston. So the setting is Boston. It's what? It's 1770, a little bit after 1770, 1771. When the Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre happened. Let's see, Tea Parties in 73. Boston Massacre. Yeah, that's right. Okay, 1770. Okay, now comes what? The people are up in arms. They are very much against what's happening in Boston and all over the colonies. They are very much against the British. The Sons of Liberty are really catching steam. Then the British decide to go a little bit, one step further. Oh, wrong idea. 1773, what do? They give you the Tea Act. Really? Really? The Tea Act basically allowed the British East India Company to sell surplus tea directly to the colonists, bypassing the colonial merchants. What? It allowed them to be taxed. Again, the British East India Company being taxed by the British government, bypassing the colonial merchants. Why? Because the colonial merchants, like we talked about last time, had to take their cut. They had to stay in business, so they had to take a little bit. They had to increase the price just a little bit to pay for them to exist. So the British East India Company said, well, a way of paying the taxes and not extending the price too high would be to sell it ourselves. Well, the colonists, the colonial merchants, there was a monopoly over the tea. They could not sell the tea from smugglers. They couldn't sell it from other countries. The only one they could get it from was the British East India Company. Wait a second. If they can't get tea to sell, they go out of business. If they're just selling tea. If they're not just selling tea and they're selling other things, they still lose a lot of money because they're still not selling tea. So the Tea Act goes in. The British East India Company is now saying, you have to buy our tea. Well, sorry. The loyalists might buy it, but nobody else will buy it. Nobody else will buy it because they're loyal to their people. They're loyal to the colonial merchants who should have been the ones getting it and then selling it. But they wouldn't even buy from them because the British were already taxing it. The British East India Company, who was bringing the tea in, was getting their cut. The price was already too high. So, what happened? The Sons of Liberty. They get together. People like Samuel Adams. They get together. They rile people up. They get people excited about overturning the British government. So what do? They disguise themselves as Mohawk Indians. And they board the British ships in Boston Harbor. Remember, I said, This is the harbor. The ships are anchored out in Boston Harbor instead of being on the Long Wharf, because they knew that if they were docked up, they would be boarded. If they're in the harbor, it would be less likely that they're boarded. But they didn't understand how much the people hated the British. And here's another thing to know. The Sons of Liberty were encircling the harbor so that none of the British East India Company ships could be offloaded. So they were sitting there full of these crates of tea. They had boxes of tea, and they weren't able to use it. They weren't able to offload it. They weren't able to sell it because the Sons of Liberty were basically shutting them down. So the Sons of Liberty floated out one night, boarded the ships. The ships didn't have as many people in there. They grabbed those crates and they threw them overboard. 342 chests of tea threw that into the water. That's like a ton of tea, literally a metric ton of tea. That's how much it most likely have weighed, all that combined, the crates, the tea, and such. Wow. So this was the Boston Tea Party. But did you know it wasn't just the Boston Tea Party? There was actually a colonial tea party. So all throughout, not just Boston, but all throughout the colonies, whoops, wrong way, all throughout the East Coast, there were other tea parties happening. Let's go through some of them. Okay, so there was the Chesterton Tea Party in Maryland. So Maryland is down right here. And they had tea coming in, and the Sons of Liberty there, and the protesters there didn't let them offload, and then boarded them and did the same thing. So they burned the shipments of tea there, those that were offloaded already, and those that were still in the harbor. You had the Edenton Tea Party in the Carolinas, down here. They had a tea party as well. Okay, it was in North Carolina, or what's now North Carolina. Okay, so you have all these different tea parties that are starting up. You have another one in Charleston, where the tea is seized and stored in a warehouse instead of being sold. It is later auctioned to raise funds for the Patriot cause. Okay, nice. What happened in Edmond? This is actually a really interesting one. A group of 51 women, that's right, not their husbands, not anybody else, women, led by Penelope Barker, organized a public boycott of the British tea and drafted a resolution to support the protests. So 51 women put together this, because who drinks a lot of tea? The women drink a lot of tea. Who's the buyers? The women are the buyers. So they created this own protest of their own. There's another one in summer of 1774. Tea protests and boycotts continued through the smaller towns throughout the colonies, all throughout the summer. What does this do to the British? What does the British want to do? Coming back up here to Boston. Okay. If they're not buying their tea, and they're now destroying said tea, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to start doing what we call, first off, it's called the coercive acts, but it was known in the colonies as the intolerable acts. Okay, so let's go into that. The intolerable acts are basically punitive punishment laws that were created by the British government because of the Boston Tea Party. So these are some of the things that they did. The Boston Port Act. This one is March in 1774. Closed Boston Harbor completely until the East India Company was compensated for all the lost tea. So 324 crates of tea had to be paid back to the British East India Company. The next thing, Massachusetts Government Act. It revoked Massachusetts charter, restricting town meetings and placing the colony basically under complete British control. Okay, so that's really bad. So it was the colonists that basically controlled it. They even sent out, remember, in the stamp Congress, Stamp Act Congress, they send out declarations that they control themselves. Well, Boston, you're not allowed to anymore. Actually, Massachusetts, all of Massachusetts, you're not allowed to anymore. The British now control that directly and put a British governor over top of it. The Administration of Justice Act happened in May, so same time. This allows British officials accused of crimes in the colonies to be tried in Britain or another colony. So those in Boston could not actually try a British officer or soldier in Boston or in Massachusetts itself. Now, here comes the Quartering Act. This was not just in Boston. This happened in other places, but mostly in Boston, because this is, again, punitive for the Boston Tea Party. The Quartering Act required colonists to house and supply British troops, even private homes if necessary. Now, here's the thing. Some would say, oh, the British get to go into your house. Now, this is a part of propaganda. They were not allowed in your house if you had your family there. If you had an empty house or if you had an empty quarters that they could use, they could demand that said spot. Now, if they came to you and said, we need housing and we need you to provide it, you had to find them housing. It did not mean that they could take over your house if you were living there. Now, some British soldiers may have taken advantage of it, but that was significant in the rule. They could not take your house away from you. So they were punitive, but they weren't unreasonable according to the British. They were punishment, but they were not unreasonable. So now you have the Quebec Act. So this is not Boston. This extends the boundaries of Quebec into the Ohio Valley and granted religious freedoms to Catholics, angering Protestant colonists. So yes, there is still a fight between the Catholics and the Protestants, and this was one of the acts to show that, hey, you know what? We know you're Protestants, but we're going to give a little extra treatment to the Catholics. But this is interesting because this came from British Parliament. Remember, British Parliament was in control or being controlled by the Church of England, not the Catholics. So this was basically a punch in the face to the Protestants that lived in Boston. You also had the Boston Port. No, we already talked about the Boston Port Act. So yeah, you had all these different things that came up. So this is when the colonists really became up in arms. And they created what's called the First Continental Congress. So the Continental Congress are basically 12 colonies. Remember, the last one was 9 colonies. Now they've gotten another 3 because people are starting to fall away from supporting Britain and supporting the king. These colonies get together. Now, some of them wanted to basically create the Declaration of Independence right there and then. But this was not the time and not the place quite yet. But the First Continental Congress sent out a petition to the king and agreed on a boycott of British goods throughout the whole colony. So the petition was basically petitioning the king to reverse these acts. But they also, together as the First Continental Congress, they also agreed on a full boycott of all British goods throughout the whole colony, or through all the colonies. Well, at least 12 of them. This is the Continental Association. It's created the boycott and protests throughout the colonies. This also created a lot of strength behind the local militias as well. So the militias were actually gaining support, gaining ammunition, and really starting to escalate their actions. And the Sons of Liberty as well. Now, spring 1775, escalation to war. What happens in 1775? Do you know this? Do you know this? Well, I'm going to tell you what this is. So, I only have a few more minutes, so I'm going to have to do this. Oh, no, I have a good amount of minutes. I actually thought I was running out of time, so I didn't go over the Continental Congress a little bit more. I don't think so. That's basically what happened in the Continental Congress. Let's go on to the other half, and we're gonna need the 15 minutes, the other 15 minutes to get this done. This is the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Okay, so you've all heard it. This is when General Thomas Gage decides to send troops over to capture two people. Now, I haven't shown you any of the pictures, but I think it might be time to show you some of the pictures that are very important for this time. And this would be, I'm going to show you some of the actors during this time. So this is Thomas Gage. Sorry, I can't get a better picture, a historical picture. I could have gotten one that we created, but this is a historical picture depicting Thomas Gage. He was the governor, and if you want to learn about his life, we've spelled out his life in here, so you can actually read his whole life and get to know him. Thomas Gage is very influential during this time, and he's the one that's put over by the British to control all of Massachusetts. Now, we're not going to get to Margaret Gage yet. This is Thomas Gage's wife. Very important for the story. But we're going to go to this guy, Paul Revere. Remember, he's the printer. He's the one that engraved. He wasn't the printer. He engraved the plates to be used for the printer to print out the pamphlets of the Boston Massacre. He's going to come up very soon in this as well. You have Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams was part of the First Continental Congress and a rebel rouser. So he was very much against the British and very vocal about it. But there's one other person that was very vocal about it. His name was John Hancock. So we're going to get to know these people very well. So let's go back to Boston. And actually, let's not go to this map. Let's go to another map of Boston. Let's see if I can find this map. Sure, I think this is the same one we were using before. Okay, so this is Boston. Okay. So during this time, Thomas Gage was setting up his decision to send troops to gather the ammunition, to gather any armaments that the militias may have gathered in Boston. He actually got word back from England to give him permission to do this. So he decides on this, and he tells the troops to prepare, but he does not tell them how they're going to go. If they're going to go by land, or if they're going to go by sea. So, with this being said, let's go back to someone that's very important. Let's go back to Thomas Gage. So Thomas Gage is making this decision. He's telling his officials. There's one other person in the room. He doesn't know that there may be loyalties somewhere else. That would be Margaret Gage, his wife, his younger wife, who didn't exactly like being in Boston. She didn't exactly like her husband as much. She became fairly supportive of the colonists' cause. And so she actually was possibly, now I do say possibly, no one actually knows if this is true, but she is possibly the informant that told Dr. Joseph Warren the British plans. So she goes out and tells Joseph Warren. Joseph Warren decides, hey, I'm going to, now this is a physician. This is a medical doctor who is a colonist and a patriot. Margaret Gage, or whoever, tells him. He then creates this plan. Okay, so we need to be able to tell Lexington and Concord, because Margaret has told us this, or somebody's told us this. We need to send out people to go out and tell people in Lexington and Concord that the British are coming. How are we going to do this? So they tell Mr. Paul Revere, not just Paul Revere, but Prescott and Doss. The only reason why we focus on Paul Revere is because of a poem written by Longfellow. Longfellow writes this poem of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. This is the ride of Paul Revere. Now, in Boston, there is a church. Actually, let's do this. We have the map up. Let's say Boston North Church. Old North Church. There we go. Where is it in Boston? Okay. So it's right here. Now there's a significance. There it is. Okay. There's some significance with this church. Okay. If you can see this picture, you're going to see this steeple. Now, steeple, of course, is higher than everywhere else. The steeple, because it's higher than everywhere else, it has a line of sight that you can see it from miles, which means you can see it at the edge of Boston. So, a plan comes out by Warren himself that says, we assume that is Warren because it's a little gray area. But he actually tells two people to go up and put lanterns. Now, one, if by land, if the British troops are going by land. Two, if they're going by sea. Now, here's the thing. Paul Revere was not waiting in Charleston. Paul Revere was waiting on the coast, on the very edge, because as soon as he found out, as soon as they put those lanterns in that church, it was the fastest way to do this, and they needed speed. He might not have been able to see the chapel from the other side of the river, especially if the fog came in. Remember, Boston is notorious, the New England, notorious for fog. If he wasn't able to see the steeple, he would not have known. So he goes to the very edge of Boston, gets word, and he rows a boat across the river, across the basically harbor, into Charleston, grabs a horse, whoops, and starts going. Okay, he starts riding. Now let's go. I'm not going to go there yet. Okay, let's bring back the map. So, over here. Whoops. Darn it. Come on. Work with me here. Machine. Okay. So you have Boston. North Church, right here. Old North Church. You have now, it shows the dot starting there, but he was actually on the edge. He saw the steeple. So he was able to float over to Charleston, grab a horse, ride up to Mystic, and then ride down and meet Doss. So Doss was another rider. He saw the steeple as well. He grabbed his horse and he started riding. He went to Roxbury, where he told the people. He went to Brookline, he told the people. Revere went to Mystic, and then he came over here. And now he was telling all the little towns in between, the British are coming. Down here you have Doss, who's riding up, and they wait here. I don't know who will ride first, but they wait here and ride together. So they leave, and as you can see, the British are coming from the south of Boston. They board ships and sail across to Lechmore Point, and that's where they offload, and then they start their march. Now, Revere and Doss are both on horses, so they're going faster. Oops. Work with me. There we go. Okay, so they're going faster. They go through Pearson Hills, all these little towns. There's little towns that are not marked on here. And they get to Lexington. And this is where they tell the people the British are coming. Now, they don't say the British are coming. That's something that comes from the poem. They don't say the British are coming. They say the regulars are out. Why the regulars are out? Well, you know, the British soldiers are called the regulars. So the regulars are marching. And so because they're marching, they get here and they calm down. They get new horses. They probably eat a little bit because they're exhausted. Now, during this time, the Hancock-Clark house. That's where John Hancock and Samuel Adams are hiding. Yes, they are in hiding. They're told, get out of here. We can't have you be captured. So they take off. They go and hide somewhere else. So, again, they're coming to Lexington to capture those two because they had spies that were basically helping them to understand where people were and things were. Supposedly they had armaments, but they didn't find anything in Lexington. And if they did, it was small amounts. Okay, so that's when Paul Revere and Doss leave. But also with a new person they come up with by the name of Prescott. And they continue to ride towards Concord. Now, let's go back to here really fast. So the British are marching up here, run by a official, military official by the name of Major Pitcairn. Why is he significant? Well, because he is one of the more reasonable officials in the British Army. And so the people actually like him. The people in Boston like him. The people in the colonies that know him like him. So he's fairly significant. And he's marching his troops. He does not want to go to war. He does not want to go to battle. He gets to Lexington and he tells his men, do not fire. No matter what, do not fire. Well, you had the Minutemen on the other side of Lexington Green. So you have these two very strong-minded, very effective groups. You have the colonists who are passionate about what they're doing, and you have the British who are under-ordered, very well-trained, the officials very well distinguished in strategy. And they sit. And they sit. Well, they don't sit, they actually stand. And they stand. No one's going to back down. And then the shot happens, which is called the shot heard around the world. And that is a shot from somebody's weapon. Nobody knows. To this day, nobody knows who fired that weapon. But whoever did started the Battle of Lexington, where many colonists actually died. They were shot at that time, died or wounded. The British, not so much. So, at this point, you have the British who are very well equipped, very much ready to fight, and there's about, what were there? Oh, I don't have the number right here. Darn it. Okay. So you have, okay, the British have 700 troops. The colonists have about 400 at Lexington. Or no, sorry, about 70 Minutemen in Lexington. Not that many. So they knew they weren't going to be able to stand against them. But they knew that they had to buy time for John Hancock and Samuel Adams to get out of there, for Paul Revere and Doss to get out of there. William Doss to get out of there. Samuel Prescott also to be able to get to Concord, because they knew that was the end point. So these brave militia, these brave Minutemen, were standing there knowing that they would probably be taken by the British, knowing that they would probably be shot by the British. And during this battle, short skirmish, 8 colonists are killed. The British proceed to march on the city. Now the colonists have time, because the British want to find armaments that might be in that city. They have time to run, and they take off. And the British search the whole city, or the whole town, don't really find much. Mid-morning is when the Battle of Concord happens. The British continue to go up. Now let's go back to this map. There's something else that's fairly significant in this map. It's interesting that we focus on Paul Revere, because over here, halfway between Lexington and Concord, oh yeah, that's right, Paul Revere is captured by the British. At this time, there's 3 of them. Paul Revere is captured, and Doss flees back to Lexington. I think he flees back in fort. Prescott is the only one that actually makes it past the British in time to go tell Concord. So this is actually like the midnight ride of Prescott, of Samuel Prescott. But he didn't start the ride, and Paul Revere was written in a poem about it, so he gets credit for it. Now, just so you know, Paul Revere actually gets released. After a while, they can't hold him anymore. They don't want to do anything with him. They get rid of him. They take everything and let him go. But Prescott is able to get to Concord. And the British, after they're done with Lexington, they start marching the rest towards Concord. So in Concord, they start taking, the British, as soon as they arrive, they start taking over the houses, digging up the armaments that's there. They actually do find armaments in Concord. Not much though. Not what they were hoping for. But what happens? So a lot of the colonists actually come up over here, past North's Bridge, and sit there. Why do they sit there? Because they want to show the British there's 4,000 of these militiamen. Sorry, no. Actually, at this time it's 400 militiamen. And there are 700 British. So it's still not going to be that big of a fight. But they sit on the hill so the British see them. So the British are respectful during this time. Now, while being respectful and not destroying the town, the British actually move up into the North Bridge. And here, they actually are able to come up to Barrett's farm. Now, when they get to Barrett's farm, they do find some goods there. But by the time they actually get up to Barrett's farm and try to come back, the colonists have come off the hill. They've come down to the North Church, and a battle ensues on the bridge, sending the British, they can't take the bridge. So it sends the British back, and they begin to retreat. By this time, colonists, militia from all over are coming to defend them. They've now increased their numbers from 400 at the North Bridge to over 4,000 militiamen joining the fight. And the British are retreating. Now, because the British are retreating, 73 are killed. 174 are wounded on their retreat all the way back to Boston, through Lexington, through Menotomy, through Cambridge. And because they don't have ships anymore, they weren't parked there, they were just dropping them off and going back. They had to come down through Cambridge Bridge and back up to the Boston Neck. Oh, no, wait a second, no. No, if I remember correctly, they didn't go through Boston Neck. They did actually go back to where they were shipped. It was the colonists that came over to Boston Neck, and they had to break the connection there. They had to blockade that area. Okay, so this whole time, and there's a great story in here. So during the retreat, let me see if I can find this. During the retreat of the British, there is actually a man. Oh no, I think it's in the rare cards. There's a man. He's like 78 years old. He hears about this. So he comes out and he starts sharpshooting the British. Starts like taking them out as they're retreating. The British didn't like this. So what'd they do? The 78-year-old man, they chase him down. No, 78 years old. You don't move fast. You might be a sharpshooter. You might be able to take some of the British out, but you don't move fast. And because you don't move fast, the British catch up to him and beat the living snot out of him. I mean, they really take him to town. But he survives. And then he lives to like 86 years old. So that's like the only battle he actually fights, but didn't matter who you were. Young and old, they came to defend the colonies against the British. Now, there is so much in here that I did not get into. I mean, so much. And this is good information. This is not boring textbook information. Like, you'll actually get to know everything about Lexington and Concord and such. So, yeah, have fun with it. I do actually mean that. It will be fun if you take it with the right heart. Now, again, I didn't like history because it was book study, which, again, this is a book, but we wrote it to make it more interesting for you. And two, I didn't like it because of lectures. I'm hoping this is not a lecture for you. I'm having fun. I hope you are too. You're getting a lot more insight than a regular history teacher would give you. You're getting a lot more insight than most books would give you. Between the curriculum, between this podcast, you're actually learning a lot more than you would anywhere else. And I'm hoping that we're making it fun. We're making it interesting. And if you want more fun, this box, where this textbook is from, has the most significant way of learning the American Revolution. I can actually say that because this is the first expansion game of the American Revolution that we have. So you're going to actually be able to play as the British or the colonists very soon you're going to be able to play as the Native Americans or the French or the others, like the Spanish that were part of this. That all comes into play. So stay tuned for that. I can't wait to tell you more. There's so much more for you to learn. Until then, I appreciate you being here and listening to this. If you have any questions, please send them my way. Otherwise, we will see you. Let's see, this is Monday, so we will see you on Wednesday when we go through the battle, the siege of Boston. And these are all the repercussions. This is actually when the Second Continental Congress meets. George Washington really comes into play. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next time. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.